Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday, December 18th, 2023, the last Monday of live shows of the year, I would guess. I mean, I have no plans to do a Christmas Day live show. Doesn't seem to make any sense. Most people want to be, hanging out with the family or going out for Chinese food or ignoring everything entirely. So, I don't know. I guess we want to indulge those of you who... I like the idea of celebrating it by ignoring it all entirely. Okay. So we'll try and honor that. And, all right, well, I don't know. It's just sort of one of those end of the year days. We're waiting on the big holidays to arrive so that everybody who is able to stay home for the holidays can stay home for the holidays. And, I don't know. We get some relaxation in there. Doesn't mean the news stops, of course. And there's plenty to catch up on, as usual. And Greg Dworkin will be here to do it. And, well, I'm trying to figure out, what's the big vibe story of the morning? I'm not really sure. Let's figure it out. I think probably all signs are pointing in my view here to, the latest in ProPublica's continuing investigation. They're really leading the way in this. They should be winning some sort of prize for this, don't you think? But leading the way in investigating very thoroughly what Clarence Thomas has been up to in terms of, grifting off of his office. And, unsurprisingly, bad things are happening as a result. So I haven't had a chance to read through this story yet. I think it was just published today, but others who are reading it are commenting on it. And it seems to have drawn us to the logical conclusion here. This is the part of the story where the questions are being asked, if not in the piece itself, then by the readers who are reading it this morning. So it looks like the relationship between the gifts being handed over to him and the way he's ruling on the court seem to overlap pretty neatly, that is. Or people are beginning to ask the question of, all right, so if he had some strange change of heart or an epiphany or evolved on the court in the way that sometimes other justices, particularly a few who were nominated as pretty reliable conservatives who nonetheless, over the course of their career, because they have lifetime tenure, the things that they need and want materially are more or less taken care of, and they feel free to make this evolution. Thomas never did, and was it that he never experienced this evolution, as sometimes some say Justice Kennedy did, some say, I don't know, various, but certainly, well, let's see, who else have they mentioned? Justice, well, who am I thinking of here? I can't even remember all of, but it's a repetitive thing. But I guess some would say Justice Stevens did as well. I mean, he was not a super conservative, but he was appointed by a Republican president and then just turned out to be considerably more liberal than they thought. In some ways, various others have described actually even Justice O'Connor as evolved that way. And Thomas never did. Scalia never really changed either, though. But what's interesting is the connection that people are making to the fact that he has, been funded throughout all of this, and that it was very clear with him versus with others. For instance, those who were independently wealthy, for instance, that he couldn't afford to, he didn't feel, or he never was able to get himself to feel like he was independent of everybody. He hasn't admitted as much, but I guess the centerpiece of today's story is that there was some open agitation at some point for higher wages for the Supreme Court, and that he actually got the court to sign on for it. And plead with Congress for raising judicial salaries, which by itself isn't a bad idea. The federal judges, I think, are pretty poorly paid, considering, the role and the interest in keeping them independent of, political patronage. It seems like, though, Thomas was constantly complaining about not being able to keep up with expenses. And of course, this strikes everybody as slightly ridiculous, given that so many of his expenses were covered by people who just wanted to be friends with a Supreme Court justice and just thought he was so wonderful and that they just wanted to be close to him. And nobody really believed that, but, people were asking questions about why is it that you feel like you're being undercompensated when you're taking $500,000 cruises around the world and going to exclusive resorts, and people are financing your $250,000 RV and paying for your his nephew's schooling, etc. How is it that you're feeling undercompensated? But they go into some great detail, apparently. But people are all sort of marveling over this. So we'll spend some time with that one. Yeah, right. It was David Souter, who I was thinking of, who was the most famous recent example, I think, of somebody who was appointed by a Republican judge and just turned out to be considerably more liberal in their rulings, particularly towards the end of their career, than, I guess, the nominators or the people behind his nomination anticipated. But again, this is something that, I don't know, that people do when they are, I guess, feeling fairly secure in their lifetime appointment. Now, there's nothing about Clarence Thomas's lifetime appointment that would suggest that it would end anytime soon, of course, except for now, when we all think we should impeach him. But just the idea that, I don't know, he felt like there was more due to him. And I guess they tried to explain it in the piece. I mean, if there's any excuse for it at all, it is, I guess, supposed to be what they're talking about when they point out, well, many other justices throughout history, currently, etc., have been independently wealthy when they reached the court, whereas Clarence Thomas, no, he was not. He came from a much more modest background, and as they point out, he had been working for the government in his entire adult life. Of course, whose choice is that? And, it's not bad pay, especially if you're coming from nothing. But then they pointed out, well, he still had student loans, law school loans to pay off when he found himself on the Supreme Court bench, which really probably is more of a commentary on, one, how pricey law school is, and two, how young and relatively inexperienced he really was to find himself landed on the Supreme Court. Most people, well, that's been the trend with Republicans, of course, nominating younger and younger justices so that they serve forever, and they, I guess, are the people who are going to eventually start worrying about money as they spend 50 years on the court at a relatively modest salary, which would be a fantastic salary for a 43-year-old who's, worked for the government his whole life. So I don't know. But at any rate, he just wanted more out of life. And he decided to take it from billionaires. So I don't know. A little weird. We'll probably give some time over to reading through that. Let's see. Other things that have developed over the weekend. Well, let's see. We've got some idea of exactly how bad it got for Rudy Giuliani. The verdict came in from the his case, which, as Greg pointed out a couple of times along the way, was similar to Donald Trump's case in that by the time it went to the trial phase, and we all started paying attention, he had already been adjudicated liable and guilty for, not guilty, but that's a criminal charge, but was going to be held liable for the suit. Because, well, in his case, he actually, pled to it, essentially. And so we were just having the penalty phase for his defamation suit, or he was being sued for defamation by the Georgia poll workers that he had so ruthlessly attacked. And at any rate, I guess the verdict is in, and what is he? He's on the hook for like $100 and something million, $150 $190 something million. Is that what I heard? I've put away the stories, of course, and we can read through that, but that's pretty funny. I'm not certain where he's thinking he'll come up with that money, but the likelihood of his actually paying that judgment, well, that's another question. And of course, he can appeal the finding and appeal the amount, and they can go on for quite a while with this one. But let's say, in fact, Paul Waldman has a piece on that in MSNBC. A very bad day for Rudy Giuliani is a very good day for America. That puts it nicely. And, here we go. There's more than that. Jury's decision that the former mayor should pay nearly $150 million. That's what it must have been 148. I don't know why I bumped it up to, I added a $50 million in damages just for my own expenses, having to read about all of this. It's very, very costly to have to do that every day. $150 million in damages for defaming 2 election workers shows that the justice system can work, at least temporarily. We'll see whether the verdict holds up in any appeals coming afterwards, or whether they have to go to court to try to make Rudy put down payments on this stuff. All right, let's see what's going on here. What is Justice got his eye on here? Oh, yeah. Alina Habba, the attorney in Trump's New York case and elsewhere. I think she's been all over the place. She, too, seeming to not have a great grasp of what's going on in that case and making things worse for her client every time she appears on television. So we'll see if we can't fit that one in there. Let's see. Oh, yes. And you may recall that down in Georgia, where there's still trials going on, the prosecutor there, Fani Willis, had demanded of the defendants, the co-defendants and co-conspirators who have pled guilty and reached some sort of an agreement, that they offer up letters of apology to the people of the state of Georgia. With, varying degrees of success in that. So guess what? They don't really apologize. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution has gotten a hold exclusively, it says, though now they may have spread a bit, of these apology letters in the Fulton County case. And guess what? The statements from Sidney Powell and Ken Chesebro, even though he's cooperating with other prosecutors in other jurisdictions now, are a total of 1 sentence long. 2 sentences between the two of them, of course. You get the sense that they didn't really mean it. And are you wondering, as I am, what would have made the prosecutor do such a thing? I don't know. Sometimes people just carry some weird habits over from childhood, I think. Or maybe they just thought it would be embarrassing. Or maybe they thought, well, if they want to embarrass themselves with a 1-sentence apology letter, everyone will scoff at that and just see that they're totally unserious people. But, we were already doing that, so I'm not certain what we gained from this, but let's read about that. Why don't we? Tamara Hollerman and Greg Bluestein have written this piece for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And let's see. Look, I'm starting to wonder whether maybe things are a little bit busy in the Dworkin household. I have not only not heard from Greg at the moment, which, not totally unreasonable. He's sometimes just wants to hear the stories we're talking about. But no indication of the raft of stories for today. So might be a little bit busy. Abby could be out chasing squirrels. Squirrels could have caught Abby, any number of things. So we'll see. Why don't we just dive into the stories ourselves, fend for ourselves. Maybe he's just thinks it's Sunday and sleeping in. I would. It's kind of gray and gloomy out today. All right, so back to those apology letters. The letters written by 2 of the attorneys who struck plea agreements in the Fulton County election interference case are just 1 sentence long and handwritten on lined notebook paper. I don't think they even left the courtroom to do it. Go home and think about it and put it on nice stationery. No, just going to tear a piece of paper out of a notebook and scroll. Okay. Here's Sidney Powell's big apology. I apologize for my actions in connection with the events in Coffee County, lawyer Sidney Powell stated in her letter on October 19th. She may have been thinking about it for days, but 19th is the date that she put on it. That's it. And very minimalist, certainly, and I guess the sort of thing that indicates she doesn't really actually apologize, and isn't even willing to acknowledge what were those events in coffee. There were just events there, and whatever they were, I apologize for them, at least insofar as my actions are connected with them, which I don't even acknowledge. That's the subtext of that one. And Chesebro, he says, I apologize to the citizens of the state of Georgia, at least he remembered who he was apologizing to, and of Fulton County for my involvement in count 15 of the indictment. But screw you on counts 1 through 14 and anything coming after 16. So I don't know. I don't know how many he was named in, or whether he's leaving some out or what. But once again, just so tight-lipped with the apologies. They obviously they don't mean it, but it was kind of a dumb thing to ask for. So I don't know if I can fault them too much for not putting very much thought into it. Anyway, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution obtained the letters from defendants Chesebro and Powell and Scott Hall, who wrote a lengthier one, on Thursday through an open records request. You can read all of the letters linked, or it says or below. So let's see some references to the other letters. The trio, along with a fourth defendant, Jenna Ellis, remember her, were required to pen the letters as part of the terms of their plea agreements with Fulton prosecutors earlier this fall. Chesebro could be seen writing from the defense table in the minutes before he accepted his deal in front of Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee. He just, I guess, wrote it right there. But the letters have been stuck in limbo ever since, first sealed by McAfee and then stuck in a bottleneck with other court officials. A spokesman for Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis declined to comment. Hall, the bail bondsman who was indicted for his role in the Coffee County election data breach, wrote the longest letter of the bunch, uncovered on Thursday. He told Georgia citizens, I wish I had never involved myself in the post-election activities that brought me before the court. That seems, well, a little bit more to the point anyway. So, we'll see. Let's see if there's more we can skim through here that can add to the picture. Oh, yeah, here we go. A little bit more from Hall himself. Although I certainly did not mean to violate any laws, I mean, I don't know what else you thought you were doing, I now realize that I did and have accepted responsibility for my actions, Hall wrote. It does nothing, but it's more to the point here. Ellis, a lawyer who worked for the Trump campaign, tearfully read her apology letter in front of McAfee during a hearing in October. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse, she said. She understood the assignment. Well, okay. That's part of her evolution from parking garage lawyer and traffic court lawyer. I think it's Alina Habba who's the parking garage lawyer? I guess so. But she was from traffic court, Jenna Ellis, until, of course, she declared herself a constitutional scholar. Anyway, some part of that evolution included understanding what remorse meant, or at least understanding how to pose as someone who understood what remorse meant. If you do something wrong that impacts the community, she did, then there needs to be real contrition. Willis said, this is Fani Willis saying, okay, this is why I asked for these letters. During an interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Willis compared the apology letters to spouses saying sorry for actions that upset their partner. That's all right. I mean, that's a view of things. I'd rather just divorce these partners and put them in jail. I view it as akin to putting your partner in prison for several years for having fomented an insurrection against the United States. But then you would never want to be married to such a person. So, I don't know. Whatever. I mean, I don't love that analogy. But then Willis goes on to say, if you do something wrong that impacts the community, there needs to be real contrition. That's true. And there hasn't been. So now what do we do? I don't know. The contrition doesn't have to be some poetic melody. It doesn't have to be pages and pages. Sometimes you just need, I'm sorry. And if you get "I'm sorry," then we can move on and move past it if it's a sincere apology. I mean, I didn't get that feeling from the one-liners. I don't know no word here so far whether she did. She continued, "It doesn't need to be very long. In fact, all I would rather is a sentence, but I think it's important." I mean, she has that prerogative. It doesn't do much for me, but okay. Chesebro was indicted, of course, for his role in the appointment of a slate of Trump electors in swing states won by Democrat Joe Biden, i.e. the president. Like Hall, Powell's charges stemmed from her involvement in the Coffee County breach. Ellis's centered on her testimony before Georgia Senate subcommittee in late 2020 about election fraud in Georgia. So, you know, that I guess if you were waiting to see what they had said, or if you ever rolled your eyes, but they're going to have to write an apology letter, what is that going to look like? The answer is the bare minimum necessary to comply and still get the deal that they thought they cut. At least in the cases of Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro. No contrition and totally unrepentant. And I guess maybe Jenna Ellis just was never really meant to be there in the first place, and she actually felt kind of human about it, which is why things never worked out for her. Okay, so let's see. Well, let's just continue on here and share the rest of the lineup that I have for you. I mentioned Alina Habba. She, too, is in the news. And the writer of this piece here in Above the Law, one of the legal blogs we've turned to in the past, is Liz Dye. And it occurs to me, didn't we just read a Liz Dye piece the other day? Was it maybe, is she also, am I thinking of the same person? Did she also write something that we read that came out of Aaron Rupar's Substack style, blog? Whatever they're calling it these days. I think so. If so, she's on fire. She's got another piece here, although this is from, let's see, middle of last week, December 14th. Is that Thursday? Alina Habba, which is quite a name, and I do think she is the parking lot attorney working for Trump. And anyway, she's prominent in the New York case as well. Alina Habba demands that Supreme Court intervene and also stay out of Trump prosecutions. Okay, so this one in connection, I guess, with the D.C. case, where she's also appearing, because, of course, that's the one that the Supreme Court, if you ask Alina Habba, is and isn't supposed to get involved with. As we know, last week, Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, applied for for cert before judgment, as the terminology goes, but looking to leapfrog the D.C. circuit in the appeal of the, what were we on again? Oh, yes, right. The appeal of the trial court's rejection of Trump's motion to dismiss all the charges against him because he's absolutely immune because once he was president, basically, is what it comes down to. And we discussed the very interesting and clever but direct, I don't think it was all that inventive, it was just good lawyering, move to take it directly to the Supreme Court. Why fool around with a lengthy appeals process followed by another lengthy appeals process when we all know that the Supreme Court is going to want to weigh in on this and have the final word? Let's just get right to the final word. Well, I don't know whether that took Trump's lawyers by surprise or not, but they are now obviously obligated to respond to this, and several of them have little to no idea what the hell is going on in the world and what this means, and Alina Habba is one of them. So, Liz Dye wrote this piece. Alina Habba demands that Supreme Court intervene and also stay out of Trump prosecutions. Can't do both. The subheader, tell me you didn't understand the assignment without telling me. Okay. Alina Habba is better on TV than Michael Cohen. That's a low bar. Whether this season's lawyer fixer winds up in the same place as Cohen is an open question. Oh boy, we should hope for that one. Including the epiphany. That would be nice. Although Habba did manage to get her client $1 million in sanctions for filing an offensively stupid lawsuit against Hillary Clinton for doing the RICO to poor innocent Donald Trump. So she's got that going for her. good work there, right? Also, Habba tends to lose the plot, as she did last night, which I guess would be Wednesday night, last night, on the Fox Business Channel with Larry Kudlow, where she demanded that the Supreme Court hurry up and do something about the gross injustice of a former president being prosecuted for crimes. Here is Aaron Rupar's embedded tweet here. So, yeah, another hint that maybe Liz Dye is the person we were thinking of, with a clip of that appearance. "We need the Supreme Court to step in and stop this," she fumed. "This has become complete mayhem, and if they don't start looking at these decisions and, as the highest court in this country, as the arbiter of the law, the ultimate arbiter of the Constitution, the people that are supposed to enforce our bedrock," just our bedrock. She didn't finish that thought. "If they don't start doing it, which, thank goodness, they are, hopefully we'll have some law and order soon." I don't think that was interesting. That didn't go anywhere, did it? So that went around in circles and was your basic word salad. To be fair to Habba, she did start the interview by claiming that the government was seeking to expedite the case. That seems to be true, and get immediate SCOTUS review solely, though, as a response to Trump's good polling numbers, not because her client just filed an appeal grounded in the doctrine of presidential immunity and then turned around and said that all the deadlines in the D.C. election interference case must be stayed indefinitely. That was the actual question at hand. No, so she accuses the special prosecutor of leapfrogging to the court because polling numbers. And perhaps presidential immunity is a touchy topic for Habba. Since yesterday, the Second Circuit ruled that her failure to raise it for 3 straight years in the E. Jean Carroll defamation case had waived the issue. Whoopsie. Well, she now knows about presidential immunity and is going to give that one a try again.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Dumb Lawyers edition, I guess. We were talking about Alina Habba and reading in Above the Law, the piece from Liz Dye about Alina Habba's lousy work last week, appearing on Fox Business Channel, was it? To complain about the posture of the special counsel's case against Trump in D.C., the election interference case, / also, at some point, the classified documents case, stolen classified documents, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, just the January 6th election interference part of the case. And I don't know, I guess just trying to spin his move in petitioning the Supreme Court to intervene early as, well, that's obviously a reaction to the fact that Donald Trump is doing so well in the polls, as opposed to, as they point out here, a direct response to their motion to dismiss. One being, their motion to dismiss was dismissed by the trial judge, Judge Dworkin, which they immediately appealed and said, we got to have an interlocutory appeal. We shouldn't even be going forward with any other part of this trial until the question is settled. Am I, in fact, totally immune to everything forever? I mean, it's a pretty central question. except that it's an awfully dumb question. I mean, nobody ever believed that was the case. But we all knew he was going to try to waste some time with it. And so the special counsel Smith just said, well, let's just waste one court's time. But just in case this one court doesn't want to touch it, let's also ask the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals to expedite its consideration. And between the two of them, someone will expedite something and we'll get some sort of ruling. And it should be on a more rapid time frame, in a more rapid time frame than ordinarily would be the case for a number of reasons, not the least of which is to try your best to preserve the current trial schedule with trial beginning in March. Although I do understand that Judge Chutkan is already floating out there. Well, we're going to try our best to keep to schedule, and if we miss the deadline to begin trial soon thereafter. But I do have to acknowledge the possibility that we may have to stretch things out here just because, the defendant is going to be successful at some point, wasting enough time, probably, that we may have to give a little bit. I'll see if I can dig that up. In the meantime, this critique of Alina Habba's work for Trump, at least her television work for Trump. So where do we leave off? Yes, there was the reminder that for presidential immunity to be so central to her, all of a sudden, to her understanding of Trump's case is something of a surprise, given that they forgot about it entirely in the E. Jean Carroll case. They never, and which is surprising because I was pretty sure that they would have brought that up and that they did bring that up. I don't know. Maybe it was just coinciding with so many other cases, but apparently at no point in the E. Jean Carroll case until very recently, when I guess Alina Habba learned about, well, to be fair, I guess, and it does say somewhere in here, to be fair to Habba, although that one was tongue in cheek, but to be actually fair, Trump's version of presidential immunity is inventive, if nothing else, but is, monumentally stupid and childlike. And it is just possible that Alina Habba just was like, well, that's not a real thing, so we're not going to be using that. Not that version of presidential immunity in the E. Jean Carroll case. We think we can win that on a completely different grounds. So why didn't she bring it up in any of the 3 years she was handling the case? Because it was stupid and was never going to work. But now it's a valid question. Well, you're on the team that's making that claim now, and you're going to be dragged directly to the Supreme Court and being forced to answer for it. So what's the story? And, we don't mind pointing out, if Jack Smith hadn't dragged you there faster, you would have been there anyway. You would have gone to the D.C. Circuit to appeal the dismissal of your motion by Judge Chutkan, and you would have lost in the D.C. Circuit, and then you would have stretched things out looking to waste time by appealing to the Supreme Court, at which point Alina Habba would have to, buy into the theory. At a minimum, if not right now, or when the motion was filed in the trial court, she supposedly, I guess, was going to have to endorse it at that point. So anyway, I guess it's both surprising and not surprising that they didn't use it in the E. Jean Carroll case, but it is surprising that she's just now becoming aware of how stupid this thing really is, I guess. Okay. Well, let's continue on. There's more. Luckily for Habba, no one at Fox Business would be reminding her of that unpleasantness, that she had failed to raise this at all in the Jean Carroll case, or the other unpleasantness, or the unpleasantness before that. We don't know what they are. They are linked here. Let's see. I'll just sort of check it out here. The first unpleasantness, another Liz Dye piece from December 1st of this month. Alina Habba, you got some splaining to do. Let's see. It's wrong. Is it wrong to approach a party represented by counsel? Oh, yes. And urge them to sign away their rights. Who can say that was, did we skip over that story entirely? I think so, because it was only tangentially related to Trump's story. but it did involve Trump, or rather, not him personally, but Trump's Bedminster Golf Club. But this was the story of, I don't know if we discussed it. I mentioned it at home, but there was briefly a to-do over an employee of Trump's Bedminster, New Jersey Golf Club who was alleging sexual harassment by her superiors at the golf club, not including Donald Trump himself, apparently. But Alina Habba, representing the Trump business, the golf club, apparently approaches the plaintiff here without disclosing that she's working for the other side, and like advises her to sign a non-disclosure agreement and a settlement or something like this. Like highly unethical, like as unethical as it gets with respect to, you know, the code that attorneys are supposed to operate on. It says not as unethical as it gets. You could murder them. That would be just an outright criminal offense. But it may even have risen to that level where there's, in fact, actual fraud and illegality involved. But that was very strange. But so I guess just making reference to that, that was one of the unpleasantnesses that Fox News was not going to bother reminding her of. And the other one was, let's see, Trump lawyer Alina Habba sued for being gross racist hell boss. Back in July of 2022, another in Liz Dye's portfolio. I don't even know what that story is, but you can imagine she's probably not a great person to work for. Okay, well, those things are all linked in the story if you'd like to read about those. We may eventually have to double back and discuss the unethical manipulation that Habba engaged in, because I think it will come back to haunt her and be tied to the Trump cases overall eventually. Even if it's at some point just her having to drop out of representing Trump as a result of either being disbarred or being jailed herself for her activities there. That was a really significant mistake, to say the least, except she knew exactly what she was doing. Anyway, back to the current story with Alina Habba on TV screaming about something that she just learned about, that is to say, Trump's weirdo ideas about presidential immunity. People should understand the Constitution, even if Jack Smith and Merrick Garland don't, agreed Kudlow, who was interviewing her at the time, who knows all about the Constitution thanks to his BA in History, University of Rochester, class of 69, represent. Now, okay, that's a little elitist, I think. But, yeah, he's not a constitutional scholar himself, that's true. But, we all come to our own understanding of the Constitution. Habba seems to have missed the memo from her boss that the Supreme Court review is not the goal here. Embedded herein after is Trump's Truth Social blah, blah, blahing about the case. So deranged Jack Smith, the Biden-appointed nut job prosecutor, with a big record of losses because he goes too far, wants to rush to the Supreme Court on the important matter of presidential immunity, which is something so basic to America that it should be automatic. It should be automatic. He doesn't actually repeat himself there, but he would if he were speaking it. And of course, no, it's not only not a real thing, but it's also not basic to America so much so that it should be automatic. He doesn't want to go to the highest court with a loss or a negative opinion. But what he does want to do is interfere with the presidential election of 2024, hoping to damage Biden's political opponent. In other words, he wants to cheat. Because if they really wanted speed, they would have brought this ridiculous lawsuit 3 years ago. And it would be long ago over. What, how? But no, they waited and waited and waited and brought it in right in the middle of my presidential campaign. The definition of election interference. 3 exclamation points to that. Now, I don't even know what he's talking about, quite honestly. 3 years ago, you're being tried for your activities with respect to January 6th, 2021. So 3 years following that would be, of course, 24. So we're just coming up on the 3rd anniversary of it. So why 3 years ago? I'm wondering whether the 3 years ago thing it actually is a backwards, inside-out reference to Alina Habba's failure to raise the presidential immunity defense, which doesn't work and doesn't exist, in the Jean Carroll case, which has been going on for 3 years. But I guess the germ of truth in this thing here is, I suppose you could look at Jack Smith's attempt to get directly to the Supreme Court as an attempt to avoid, you were eventually going to be in front of the Supreme Court. I think everybody concedes that. Trump, of course, thinks that he was going to win at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals level, and that Smith didn't want to be in front of the Supreme Court appealing a loss at the circuit court level, which, he wouldn't. He'd rather be there discussing it in the context of, well, we have a ruling. The only ruling on the record is a ruling in my favor by the trial judge. But I don't think there was any real chance of getting a decision in favor of Trump from out of the circuit court. So I don't think that's a realistic, but it's an objection. He just wants to throw that one out there. Then the 3 years thing is just gobbledygook. That makes no sense. How in the world would he have brought this lawsuit 3 years ago? And it's not a lawsuit. It's a criminal case. He just doesn't know what he's talking about, but no surprise there. So, back to Liz Dye's commentary on it. See, the special counsel knows he's going to lose at the DC Circuit, which just, she says, yeeted Trump's civil immunity claims into the sun, and where Smith has drawn 2 Biden appointees for his 3-judge panel. And so he's rushing to get to the Supreme Court so they can hurry up and dismiss this whole case on grounds of presidential immunity, something which is so basic to America that it should be automatic. Why didn't Smith bring this prosecution 3 years ago instead of waiting to be appointed as special counsel when Trump declared his candidacy? Yeah. Note that Trump has foregone his usual rhetoric about Smith having a terrible record at the Supreme Court. Apparently that's something he likes to say about him. Because, and why does he say it? No real reason. Although there is this. The reason that Trump sometimes says that Jack Smith doesn't do well at the Supreme Court is that in 2016, the court decided, in another case we discussed here on the air, that former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell hadn't traded any official act for the Ferraris and Rolexes, not Rolodexes. Those are pretty cheap. The Rolex is more expensive. So his conviction by Smith in courts below had to be overturned. And that was a fairly ludicrous decision, but, it did happen. Have any other lawyers ever lost cases? Yes, they have. But anyway, that's supposed to be the terrible record. Trump never mentions, of course, Smith's conviction of former Congressman Rick Renzi and how that held up in the Supreme Court. And so, of course, as a result, Trump had to pardon the guy. But he seems to have forgotten that case. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has given Trump 8 days to explain why it shouldn't grant cert before judgment and decide the threshold issue of immunity right now. And if that doesn't happen, the D.C. Circuit has ordered a blistering briefing schedule to conclude on January 2nd. So, having pled for expedited consideration from both courts, if the Supreme Court doesn't take it up any faster than that, we at least find out that the D.C. Circuit wants briefings to conclude by January 2nd so that they can turn around a quick decision probably in mid-January and save the trial schedule. So, good luck getting the High Court to hold back and simultaneously put a stop to all this mayhem in time for a merry Mar-a-Lago Christmas. So that's her holiday wish for Alina Habba. Good luck to you on that one. No surprise, though. She doesn't really understand what the hell's going on, what's at stake, and what's likely to happen with any of this. Okay, so let's see. Here's one explanation. This is a good one here from our which of these social medias am I on here? Okay, Blue Sky Pal, real pseudonym guy, tells us that there's a big rain and windstorm in Connecticut right now, and maybe Greg's lost power / internet from that. Of course, we all know very famously that Greg's got a very robust backup generator system, but that won't do anything for the internet. And of course, you want to make sure that it's directed towards, well, let's say refrigerator, freezer, heating and cooling. Well, cooling perhaps in the summer months. You can have rainstorms then too. Heating, whatever, keeping the lights on. And if the storm's really bad, keeping on the TV or radio to make sure that you have ample warning for any really severe weather conditions. That could certainly be it. And when the internet is out, the internet is out. What can you do? Sometimes, I guess if it hits him early enough that he has no charge on his phone, sometimes he'll turn to the social media channels and say, I can get something out here, and let them know I'm not going to make it. But, if you got a storm going on, I'm sure Abby doesn't like it very much. Who knows? Trees could be down, any number of things. So, okay, thanks very much. That's a pretty good possibility. Let's bank on that one because I don't want to think about it being anything else. All right. We have, as usual, enough news to carry the show. So we'll soldier on. This might be a great opportunity then to dive into the latest ProPublica piece that I told you about. Yeah, everybody's probably reading it now. Why don't we could read it together and catch up on the latest about Clarence Thomas. This is going to be one of those ones where we have to do a little bit of scrolling to get to the story. A delicate matter. Clarence Thomas's private complaints about money sparked fears he would resign. Yes, and what a fear it would have been. I would have been so worried had he resigned. Although, you never know what kind of crazy monster you're going to get. But honestly, he's the worst among the worst monsters of the court as it is. So the likelihood of getting worse, it's not impossible. And certainly if it had happened during the Trump era, who knows what the hell would have come of it. But anyway, apparently his complaints came much earlier than that. But that's the headline here. Delicate matter being the quote part here. I guess he must have used that in his correspondence with members of Congress pleading for more money, essentially. Justin Elliott, Joshua Kaplan, Alex Mirjeski, do I have that in? That's better, I think. And Brett Murphy are byliners on this piece from just this very morning. Okay. Interviews and newly unearthed documents reveal that Thomas, facing financial strain, somehow, privately pushed for a higher salary and to allow Supreme Court justices to take speaking fees. That's our subheader here. And let's begin the story. In early January 2000, that's quite a while ago, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was at a 5-star beach resort in Sea Island, Georgia, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. You might at that point say, hey, don't go to a 5-star beach resort if you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. But I don't think he was ever paying for it. So I guess it's okay. He was simply taking it as a bribe. So, everything's fine. Anyway, after almost a decade on the court, Thomas had grown frustrated with his financial situation. According to friends, he had recently started raising his young grandnephew, and Thomas's wife was soliciting advice on how to handle the new expenses. Just soliciting advice on it. Like, not dollars, advice. The month before, the justice had borrowed $267,000 from a friend to buy a high-end RV, which, again, if you're already hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, don't add another $250,000 for an RV unless wink, wink, I'm only borrowing it for a little while, and then I'm going to be gifted this RV. Unless the $267,000 is the hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that we're referring to here. At the resort, and again, by the way, we'll figure it out. I'm sure this is laid out somewhere in here. There's a timeline. But, if the $267,000 for the RV was the hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that you're talking about, and you're at the 5-star Sea Island resort, on the one hand, you might say, well, the hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, it's not weighing on me very much because it's my friend loaning me the money, and it may even be clear already that he's just going to waive the debt. But again, I guess at that point you might say, what did I do? Okay, a $250,000 RV. If you're going to get an RV, right, it might as well be a $250,000 RV, especially if you don't really have to pay for it. You might, though, if you're worried about your finances, say, why did I get that RV if I really would rather vacation at 5-star resorts like at Sea Island here? You know, I thought I wanted to be in Walmart parking lots. I said I wanted to be in Walmart parking lots. But as it turns out, I'd really rather be here at this 5-star resort. And I'm not too worried because I'm going to get gifted this RV. But I mean, did I really need the RV at all? Why did I do that? Even if he gives it to me, it's still, I'm going to have to, I don't know, put gas in it, something, wash it once in a while. I don't know. I got nowhere to store it. It might make, I mean, he's questioning his life choices at this point. But his life choices include $250,000 RVs as gifts. So that's not so bad. Anyway, at the resort. Oh, okay. Now we understand why he's at the resort. If you have this RV and you love going around in your RV and living in parking lots, why are you at this resort? Here's the answer. At the resort, Thomas gave a speech at an off-the-record conservative conference. He found himself seated next to a Republican member of Congress on the flight home. The two men talked, and the lawmaker left the conversation worried that Thomas might resign. So he must be talking about a Republican member of Congress, who's probably the only one that would listen to Clarence Thomas complain about his salary anyway. Congress should give Supreme Court justices a pay raise, Thomas told him. If lawmakers didn't act, one or more justices will leave soon, maybe in the next year. At the time, Thomas's salary was $173,600, equivalent to over $300,000 today. But he was one of the least wealthy members of the court, and on multiple occasions in that period, he pushed for ways to make more money. In other private conversations, Thomas repeatedly talked about removing a ban on justices giving paid speeches. Thomas's efforts were described in records from the time obtained by ProPublica, including a confidential memo to Chief Justice William Rehnquist from a top judiciary official seeking guidance on what he termed a delicate matter. The documents, as well as interviews, offer insight into how Thomas was talking about his finances in a crucial period in his tenure, just as he was developing his relationships with a set of wealthy benefactors. That's no coincidence there, I'm sure. Well, I'm not going to get more money, huh? Well, I better start developing some relationships with wealthy benefactors. Now would be a good time for that. Congress never did lift that ban on speaking fees or give justices the major raise, but in the years that followed, as ProPublica has reported, Thomas accepted a stream of gifts from friends and acquaintances that appears to be unparalleled in the modern history of the Supreme Court. Some defrayed living expenses, large and small, private school tuition, vehicle batteries, tires. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Every time even a minor expense comes up, you can just turn to somebody else to cover it for you. Other gifts from a coterie of ultra-rich men supplemented his lifestyle, such as free international vacations on the private jet and super yacht of Dallas real estate billionaire Harlan Crow. That's where this whole thing started with this series, right? Precisely what led so many people to offer Thomas money and other gifts remains an open question. Okay. There's no evidence the justice ever raised the specter of resigning with Crow or his other wealthy benefactors. George Priest, a Yale Law School professor who has vacationed with Thomas and Crow, told ProPublica he believes Crow's generosity was not intended to influence Thomas's views, but rather to make his life more comfortable. Sure. That may be it may be a distinction without a difference. It may even be true. But you're talking about you got this information from somebody who has also accepted vacation gifts, I guess, from Crow. Is that what's being implied here? George Priest, who has vacationed with Thomas and Crow. So I guess so, right? He says, well, I'm not giving this to you so that you rule a certain way. I'm giving this to you to make your life more comfortable, which is, I guess, a way of saying, I want you to remain happy and on the court because you're already ruling the way I want you to. And it should be understood from that, I guess, that if you stop ruling the way I want you to generally, maybe our friendship dissolves and you're on your own. Maybe not. But yeah, okay. So they haven't done anything. Crow hasn't incriminated himself directly by saying, if you rule this way, I'll give you the money. He's instead said, I trust that you will rule this way and you'll continue to rule this way. And that's what makes me so positively inclined towards you, that I would like to make your life more comfortable. That way you will stay on this job. I mean, that's meant to be what we understand here. So he views Thomas as a Supreme Court justice. He views Thomas as a Supreme Court justice as having a limited salary, which he does, Priest said. So he provides benefits for him. Okay, but that's wrong, bad, illegal, unethical, etc. I mean, the reason there, and this does go to the heart of why there's lifetime tenure for these jobs. We may not have done enough to consider how much these justices ought to be making, considering that lifetime tenure also means that they will forego a lifetime of very lucrative practice elsewhere. But okay, I mean, that's the trade-off for, if you want to be able to define what the law is going forward forever, then yeah, you choose one or the other, not both. I mean, there's ways to do both, just not from the Supreme Court. Anyway, very interesting way of circumventing the reality of this bribery. Thomas and Crow didn't respond to questions for this story, of course. Crow, a major Republican donor, has not had cases at the Supreme Court since Thomas joined it, and has previously said Thomas is a dear friend. And that's very nice of him. David Sokol, a conservative financier who has taken Thomas on vacation on his private jet, said in a statement, or on a private jet anyway, said in a statement that he and Thomas never discussed the justice's finances or when he might retire. Please don't tell me, because then I'll be on the hook for this stuff. Thomas's comments in 2000 were to Florida Representative Cliff Stearns, a vocal conservative who'd been in Congress for 11 years at the time. More after this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I guess everybody is reading this article now and reacting. I just happened to see via Blue Sky here that, let's see, grabbing that passage that we just read about George Priest, the Yale Law School professor, who says, hey, he's not bribing him to decide one way or another. He just wants to make his life more comfortable and provide benefits for him. And, well, let's see. First reaction that I grab here is from Marissa Cabas, a frequent commenter on all matters political and legal, just in all caps, screaming into the void here. That is a form of influence. Just providing benefits for him. That's bribery. Oh, I didn't want to provide cash. I just wanted to provide the benefits that cash can buy without the paper trail. Yeah, that is a form of influence. You're an effing law professor, George. You should realize this. And comment on top of that. Oops, I've already lost it here because the commentary is flowing fast and furious here. But if I scroll back, Leah Littman commenting that George Priest is also the Yale Law School professor who picked Brett Kavanaugh for clerk for Judge Kaczynski, one of the feeder judges from Kaczynski was Ninth Circuit, right? But one of the feeder judges whose clerks very frequently go on to clerk for the Supreme Court. And it's a fairly frequent happening as well that once you've clerked for the Supreme Court, you're in the pipeline for a judgeship, federal judgeship yourself, and maybe even, for a select few, a seat on the Supreme Court, as is the case with Brett Kavanaugh. So, how did Brett Kavanaugh, who by most accounts that we've read on the air anyway, spent the bulk of his time at Yale boozing it up and sexually harassing people, how did he get a prime clerkship that set him up for federal service for the rest of his life? George Priest, who apparently saw nothing wrong with going on vacation with billionaires who liked Clarence Thomas a lot, along with Clarence Thomas, and comes up with that formulation. He wasn't trying to bribe him. He was just trying to provide certain benefits to him. That is a distinction without a difference. Well, there you go. He's been involved in this sort of stuff, I guess, for quite a while. So he nominated or picked Brett Kavanaugh for the Kaczynski clerkship that set Kavanaugh up for the SCOTUS clerkship with Justice Kennedy that set him up for his current job. Okay, good eye, Leah. Should I mark this thing? I guess so. So you can all see it as well. Plus you get to see Marissa Kabas yelling and screaming about this as well. And right to do so. Okay. Let's see. Oh boy, everybody is just reading along here. We better just go ahead and read the rest of the story so we can make our own commentary on it. So where were we with this? Right. Oh, the member of Congress to whom Clarence Thomas was complaining on the plane ride home, Cliff Stearns, vocal conservative, as we said, who'd been in Congress for 11 years at the time. This was in 2000, and occasionally socialized with the justice. They set off a flurry of activity across the judiciary in Capitol Hill. His importance as a conservative was paramount, Stearns said in a recent interview. We wanted to make sure he felt comfortable in his job. That's lifetime appointment for you. That's the comfort you're supposed to be given for this. And he was being paid properly. Okay. I mean, raising the salary wouldn't have been outrageous at the time. But it wasn't going to be enough for Thomas. Thomas wanted, a $250,000 RV. They just don't pay that much. The whole salary for a year going to an RV just wasn't going to happen for a federal official. There's an often criticized dynamic surrounding the most important jobs in the federal government. The posts pay far less than comparable jobs in the private sector, but officials can cash in once they leave. Ex-regulators sell advice to the regulated. Generals retire to join military contractors. Former senators get jobs lobbying Congress. That's true, and it's bad, but it's out there. But there is no revolving door payday waiting on the other side of a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Justices generally stay on the bench past their 80th birthday, if not until death. In 2000, justices were paid more than cabinet secretaries or members of Congress, and far more than the average American. Still, judges' salaries were not keeping pace with inflation, a source of ire throughout the federal judiciary. Young associates at top law firms make more than Supreme Court justices, while partners at the firms could earn millions a year. Some of Thomas's colleagues were extremely wealthy. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was married to a high-paid tax lawyer, and Justice Stephen Breyer, this is interesting, I didn't know this, to the daughter of a wealthy British lord. How do you like that? Thomas did not come from money. When he was appointed to the court in 1991, he was 43 years old and had spent almost all his adult life, which isn't that long at 43, working for the government. At the time, he still had student loans from law school, Thomas has said. So, your adult life working for the government at 43 years of age is, perhaps 20 years. That's nothing to sneeze at, but, the point is he was extraordinarily young and fairly inexperienced. He hadn't been a judge at all anywhere when he was appointed to the Supreme Court. So, I don't know. Anyway, the full details of Thomas's finances over the years remain unclear, not to say the very least about it. He made at least 2 big purchases around the early 90s. That is to say, after being told, we'll take care of you with a $150,000, $170,000 salary, at least for life. He bought a Corvette, which, a bit of an extravagance, but not out of keeping with somebody who's just been handed a $175,000 a year for life. A Corvette, okay. And a house in the Virginia suburbs on 5 acres of land. Both nice, both kind of extravagant for somebody who's had no money for most of his life, but, having just been promised a federal salary, a fairly major one for life, those things I don't find exorbitant. When Thomas and his wife Ginny bought the home for $522,000 a year after he joined the court, they borrowed all but $8,000, less than 2% of the purchase price, property records show. So they took on a very big mortgage, that's for sure. I don't think, again, nothing untoward really about that mortgage either. Certainly around, well, I don't know if 91, 92, we were quite in the giant boom at that point. But again, it was just in all the papers that despite all the controversy, someone was going to be paying him X amount forever for the rest of his life. Fair game giving him a loan on that, even with very little money down. Public records suggest a degree of financial strain, though. Throughout the first decade of his tenure, the couple regularly borrowed more money, including a $100,000 credit line on their house and a consumer loan of up to $50,000. Around January 1998, Thomas's life changed when he took in his 6-year-old grandnephew, becoming his legal guardian and raising him as a son. The Thomases sent the child to a series of private schools. They didn't have to do that. And that was probably a bit of an extravagance given that they had said, all right, well, my salary is not huge. It's a big improvement and all, but then I just bought a house and a car. It really should have been one or the other, but who knows how your life changes, right? You buy the car and you buy the house and then circumstances change and you say, well, here's the grandnephew. You need to take care of him. Shoot, I would have done things differently had I known. However, you just bought a house in the Virginia suburbs on 5 acres. My guess is you had access to fairly good public schools at that point, but you chose not to take those. Anyway, in early January 2000, Thomas took the trip to the Georgia Beach Resort. Thomas was there to deliver a keynote speech at Awakening, which was a conservative thought weekend. How much thought? Well, I don't know, but it did feature golf, shooting lessons, and aromatherapy, very Republican, along with panel discussions with businessmen and elected officials. So conservative thought is have a thought, have a snack. Have a thought, shoot a gun. Have a thought, play golf. Have a thought, do aromatherapy. Then have a thought about spending the next decade to 2 decades denying that you have anything to do with aromatherapy, and that's for elite latte drinking weirdos. But okay. Anyway, a founder and organizer of the annual event, Ernest Taylor, told ProPublica that Thomas's trip was paid for by the organization. And it must have been at that point that he said, I could live like this if other people just paid for it. Thomas reported 11 free trips that year on his annual financial disclosure, mostly to colleges and universities, but did not disclose attending the conservative conference, an apparent violation of federal disclosure law. How odd that he chose that one of all 11. Of the 11 he disclosed, this one was, I don't know. You don't know how many he didn't disclose, I guess, but I guess he felt comfortable talking about I went to a college to talk to college kids about staying in school or going to law school. But I don't want to admit to this other one. Here embedded is a screen grab, I guess, of the program overview of the conference that year. You want to know about it? Awakening is a private, family-oriented conservative thought weekend. The 3-day program features topics of national interest led by distinguished guest speakers. By the way, nothing family-oriented about that. The kids don't want to hear discussion of topics of national interest led by distinguished guest speakers. Trips to Europe, that's what the kids want. You think they want to take foxtrot lessons? No. But I guess what this is supposed to mean is you can bring your spouse and then you can bring your kids and they can go to the beach and you hobnob, and then at night, your spouse comes with you to cocktail parties and either the kids sleep or you get a babysitter or whatever. Family-oriented. I guess that just means we're not going to be showing porno movies, as much as Thomas would like that, I'm sure. I mean, remember, it was just 10 years earlier that he had just gone through his confirmation battle, and the major topic of discussion was how much he liked to watch porn and talk about it at the office. So you want to invite him. I guess this is their work is cut out for them. We got to have family-oriented conservative thought weekends so that Clarence Thomas, remains on the straight and narrow, I guess. We believe that all of us have a passion for our country, even the kids, I guess. Through Awakening, we have an opportunity to share powerful ideas with each other to make our country even better. As we learn from national authorities, our participants become better informed and can use this information to create more of an impact. That's it. In American society, and also make money. This year, we'll address such topics as e-privacy, back when we didn't know what to call it. It's now just privacy. Violence in our culture. The 2000 elections. Oh, boy. I guess that hadn't come up yet. They didn't realize what a topic that was going to be. NATO and world involvement. NATO, I hate NATO. Parenting. Parenting, I hate parenting. The euro versus the dollar. What do you mean versus? Anyway, safe guns and what to do with them. Interesting. Can corporations affect our culture? Do you think? Gee whiz, that's a topic. And also, and I guess this is a separate list, introduction to yoga. What? Outrageous. Get rid of that. Etiquette. Why? Shooting school. That's, I guess, part of etiquette. Armed society being a polite society, of course. Piggy bank to portfolio. So that's for Clarence Thomas, like how to go from saving your spare change to having a broad investment portfolio. Swing dancing and a marsh boat ride. Those are amazing conservative thoughts. Anyway, on a commercial flight back from Awakening, commercial flight, ugh, gross. Thomas brought up the prospect of justices resigning to Cliff Stearns, the Republican lawmaker, worried. For some reason, Stearns wrote a letter to Thomas after the flight promising to look into a bill to raise the salaries of members of the Supreme Court. By the way, I mean, at this point, we should probably Republicans should have stopped to consider what might be at the root of some of this is their thing. Like they thought, we're going to start nominating really super young people to the Supreme Court so that they stay on the court forever. Not thinking it all through, I guess, or at least not in the case of people from Thomas's background. There's not a lot of money there. You're going to want to stick to independently wealthy, very young people, or if not independently wealthy, then people who have familial wealth, which might come to them at some point, like perhaps in the case of Brett Kavanaugh. But if you nominate very young people to the Supreme Court who don't have a ton of money to their name, they're going to realize pretty quickly that their prime earning years, are behind them, or at least their prime social climbing years that would lead to big earnings later on, to partnerships in major law firms. They're going to have to give that up if they're joining the court in their 40s. And yeah, with a lifetime appointment, by the time you're 60 and you're starting to normally thinking about retirement and you realize I have no savings, that's why people stay on the court until they're dead, is there's nowhere else to go, nowhere else to maintain the lifestyle. And, it becomes a long-term care facility, the Supreme Court, much like the United States Senate, except that one doesn't come with lifetime tenure. Well, not officially. Anyway, but yeah, they sort of realized that this isn't really going to work out. The people we want to put on the court forever, they're not going to want to do this unless there's some other way to make money, which actually leads us to the problem. We shouldn't be doing this because this is going to result in corruption. But I guess for Republicans, either they quote unquote didn't think about that, or they did in fact think about that and said, the solution is corruption and bribery. That's okay. We just make sure that it's our people doing the corruption and bribery, and considering how much money it's going to cost to do that corruption and bribery, the likelihood that it's going to come from liberal progressives is limited. There's only a certain class of people that can afford this, and even politically, socially liberal billionaires are, when it comes to issues of taxation, which is what we're about, they're pretty conservative because they want to hold on to their billions and influence everything around them forever, beyond their own deaths as well. So it's a pretty good bet. But yeah, they should have realized this was coming. And so should Thomas. But, what are you going to do? Walk away from that prospect? No, of course not. Anyway, as we agreed, I guess Stearns writes to Thomas, it is worth a lot to Americans to have the Constitution properly interpreted. We must have the proper incentives here, too. So they are beginning to realize what this means. They're just not building a legal solution to it. They're just saying, we'll work out some bribes for you. Stearns' office soon sought help from a lobbying firm working on the issue, and he delivered a speech on the House floor about judges' salaries getting eroded by inflation. Thomas's warnings about resignations was relayed at a meeting of the heads of several judges' associations. L. Ralph Meacham, or I'm not certain how he pronounces it, but it's Mecham, then the judiciary's top administrative official, fired off the memo describing Thomas's complaints to Rehnquist, his boss. I understand that Justice Thomas clearly told him that, in his view, departures would occur within the next year or so. Meacham wrote of Thomas's conversation with Stearns. Meacham worried that, from a tactical point of view, congressional Democrats might oppose a raise if they sensed the apparent purpose is to keep Justices Antonin Scalia and Thomas on the court. Scalia had 9 children and was also one of the less wealthy justices, though he died at a 5-star resort himself. Meacham and Rehnquist have since died, as well as Scalia, of course, as I mentioned. It is not clear if Rehnquist ever responded. Several months later, Rehnquist focused his annual year-end report on what he called the most pressing issue facing the judiciary, the need to increase judicial salaries. That is interesting. So his year-end report, by the way, would have been at the end of 2000, which means that following the disruptive 2000, the crazy 2000 election, and the issuance of the Bush v. Gore decision and all that rode on it, Justice Rehnquist said, you know what? The most pressing issue facing the judiciary right after Bush v. Gore is we now also want to have a lot more money. It's like, I don't know. I mean, obviously he's going to want to put Bush v. Gore behind him, but wow, I don't know. I find that a little unusual, a little difficult to believe that was really the most pressing issue here. But I don't know. It's kind of interesting. And again, so the whole setup here is Thomas says to Stearns, I got to have more money. This idea of taking a seat on the Supreme Court at 43 and not having a lucrative private practice beforehand, or not being independently wealthy through some other means, in about 20 years. Yeah, the idea of me staying as a lifetime appointee is not looking nearly as good here, and I'm just going to leave. So let's see. This is in 2000 that he does this, and Thomas is 43 when he's appointed to the Supreme Court in 91. So it's 10 years later. He's in his early 50s. And he's like, I'm out of here. So that's interesting because, they wanted him to stay there and rule from a wacko conservative perspective forever. But that was the plan. And as it turns out, the plan of putting young people on the court so that they'll serve forever, in practical terms, means they're really only willing to serve about 10 years. 10. Half the time that he already put in the federal government. He put in 20 years for nothing in toiling and obscurity, but then he was famous, and then 10 years later, he's like, this still isn't enough for me. I'm out of here. So that's kind of interesting. So I'm sure it was partly, we want him in place forever to rule from a conservative perspective, but it was also probably partly, our whole Supreme Court plan, our whole strategy for taking over the Supreme Court is in jeopardy if it turns out that people don't want to serve for a lifetime at this price. They only want to serve 10 years. We might as well go back to issuing or nominating actual experienced jurists who may or may not have had the opportunity to make a ton of money in the private sector. But since they like to appoint people from straight off the federal bench, they're just going to run into that problem at different points in their career. People who have held on as federal judges into their 60s hoping to be elevated to the Supreme Court, which is just the way it used to be. And I guess one of the reasons they lived with the lifetime appointment thing and the no term limits for the Supreme Court, and why that wasn't disturbing in the past, was people did only spend 10 years on the court, possibly 20. There were some long-lived justices, but if you're nominating people who have long experience and they're in their at least late 50s and 60s, there was a natural limitation to your lifespan, but there were quality people who have proven themselves, as opposed to let's just put ideologues on there and park them there forever. And it was now turning out that they were not willing to stay there forever. So I don't know. That was damaging that gave them real cause to worry. Our whole strategy might be unsound. So where did we leave off? Oh, yes, right. With Rehnquist concluding at the end of 2020. Well, you know what the biggest problem for this judiciary has been? We don't get enough money. Not that we decide things arbitrarily and pick presidents. Okay. Several people close to Thomas told ProPublica they believed that it was implausible the justice would ever retire early. And that he may have exaggerated his concerns to bolster the case for a raise. That's possible. But around 2000, chatter that Thomas was dissatisfied about money circulated through conservative legal circles and on Capitol Hill, according to interviews with prominent attorneys, former members of Congress, and Thomas's friends. It was clear he was unhappy with his financial situation and his salary, one friend said, even though it had bought him a 5-acre estate in Virginia and a Corvette some years earlier. Former Senator Trent Lott, then the Senate Republican Majority Leader, had recalled in a recent interview that there were serious concerns at the time that Thomas and other justices would leave. Who were the other justices? I guess Scalia. The public received hardly a hint that such conversations about Thomas were unfolding in Washington. Why would you? Thomas did once allude to government salaries in a 2001 speech praising the value of public service. The job is not worth doing for what they pay. It's not worth doing for the grief, he said, but it is worth doing for the principle. Fair enough. Around that time, Thomas was also pushing to allow justices to make paid speeches, a source of income that had been banned in the 1980s. On several occasions, Thomas discussed lifting the ban with appellate judge David Hansen, who chaired the Judiciary's committee responsible for lobbying Congress on issues like pay, according to Meacham's memo. At Senator Mitch McConnell's request, a provision for removing the ban for judges was quietly inserted into a spending bill in mid-2000. Why McConnell made the proposal became a subject of scrutiny in the legal press after the Legal Times reported the measure had been dubbed the Keep Scalia on the Court bill. Scalia responded that the honorarium ban makes no difference to me and denied that he would ever leave the court for financial reasons. The ban was never lifted. McConnell did not respond to a request for comment. And why lift the ban? Once you realize, hey, the only thing they can do is impeach me, and they're afraid to do that, so why don't I just go take some honoraria and not report it? During his second decade on the court, Thomas's financial situation appears to have markedly improved. In 2003, he received the first payments of a $1.5 million advance for his memoir, a record-breaking sum for justices at the time, but at least it's, the sort of payment we've all come to understand as plausibly non-corrupt. Ginny Thomas, who had been a congressional staffer, was by then working at the Heritage Foundation and was paid a salary in the low six figures. So again, why the worries? Most people would do fine with that. Thomas also received dozens of expensive gifts throughout the 2000s, sometimes coming from people he'd only met a short time before. Thomas met Earl Dixon, the owner of a Florida pest control company, while getting his RV serviced outside Tampa in 2001, according to the Thomas biography, Supreme Discomfort. Weird title. The next year, Dixon gave Thomas $5,000 to put toward his grandnephew's tuition. All right. I mean, not all right, but it's not $1 million, but, it's bad, but it's one of the more minor bribes, I guess, that I have seen mentioned so far. $5,000 to put toward his grandnephew's tuition. Thomas reported the payment in his annual disclosure filing. And I guess he figured once they decided not to make a big deal out of that, like that immediately wasn't flagged, maybe I should just get bigger donations toward my expenses. Larger gifts then went undisclosed. Crow paid for 2 years of private high school, which tuition rates indicate would have cost roughly $100,000. I got away with $5,000. Can I get away with $100,000? It turns out I can. Should we keep escalating? It turns out he does. So there's your answer. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think we can finish this ProPublica piece and maybe squeeze in a few other stories here. But this really is the talk of the town, this town, on this Monday. So well worth, I think, dedicating this much time to it. Let's see where we left off here. Yes, then I guess they escalated to larger gifts, right? Once he got away with $5,000, which was disclosed, $5,000 to his grandnephew's tuition from Earl down in Florida, the owner of a pest control company. Yeah, a modest bribe in that respect. $5,000. Okay, I got away with that. What if I asked for, what if I just magically received $100,000 worth of tuition from a billionaire? I don't know. There he reports that. Should I report it? Not report it? I don't know. I forget what the situation was. This was all covered in the initial rounds of reporting from ProPublica. They may remind us. But, all right, yeah. In 2008, it gets, I don't know whether it gets worse, but it continues. 2008, another wealthy friend forgave, quote, a substantial amount or even all, unquote, of the principal on that loan that Thomas had used to buy the $250,000 RV, according to a recent Senate inquiry prompted by the New York Times' reporting, picking up on and further developing the initial work of ProPublica. Much of the Thomas's leisure time was also paid for by a small set of billionaire businessmen who brought the justice and his family on free vacations around the world. Wouldn't that be nice? Thomas has said he did not need to disclose the gifts of travel, and his lawyer has disputed the Senate findings about the RV. And yet there they are. By 2019, the justice's pay hadn't changed beyond keeping up with inflation, but Thomas's views had apparently transformed from 2 decades before. That June, during a public appearance, Thomas was asked about salaries at the court. "Oh, goodness, I think it's plenty," Thomas responded. "My wife and I are doing fine. We don't live extravagantly, but we are fine." So, same amount of money, pretty much, adjusted for inflation, went from, "Oh, Congressman, you got to change everything, and you got to do this, and you got to do that to help me out," to "we're doing fine," which he was. He was doing fine, and Maybe he thought the law changed. Maybe he thought Cliff Stearns and Mitch McConnell had gone to bat for him and made a difference. But maybe not. But at any rate, nothing changed. The law didn't change. His salary didn't change, but his view of how he was doing changed because he was doing fine. He was doing better. He was getting lots of free stuff. The total compensation package was certainly better. A few weeks later, Thomas boarded Crow's private jet and headed to Indonesia. He and his wife were off on vacation, an island cruise on Crow's 162-foot yacht. So, there you go. That's the latest from ProPublica. That's what everybody's talking about. They are, of course, rightfully criticizing it from all the right angles, to say the least. Okay, so let's see. A couple other things we want to get to. I suppose we should get you the facts and some of the opinion, updating you on exactly what happened to Giuliani at the end of last week. We'll start with the New York Times factual summary of things. Jury orders Giuliani to pay $148 million to election workers he defamed. Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss, you know them, wrongfully accused by Rudy Giuliani of having tried to steal votes from Trump in Georgia, were awarded the damages by a federal court in Washington. So that's the basic facts of it. Now, Eileen Sullivan then goes on and provides even greater detail in running through things. But I guess the question is, do we read that or do we read Paul Waldman's commentary on it? Because he's going to be covering the basics of it as well. Why don't we do that? And then we can try and squeeze in a couple other stories. Remember, I told you this was at MSNBC. A very bad day for Rudy Giuliani is a very good day for America. A jury's decision that the former mayor should pay nearly $150 million in damages for defaming two election workers shows that the justice system can work, even as it's not working very well on Clarence Thomas. This is Paul Waldman's piece from the end of last week. Near the end of the trial in a defamation case brought by two former election workers in Georgia, Rudy Giuliani decided, for perhaps the first time in his life, that it would be better to keep his mouth shut. Remember his braggadocio? I'm gonna get on the stand. I'll straighten this whole thing out, just like Donald Trump, promising that, and then being talked out of it at the last minute. It was never going to happen. Anyway, though he was expected, not really, to testify in his own defense, the former New York mayor thought better of it, or more likely, his lawyers convinced him that a cross-examination would be a disastrous coda to a case that may bankrupt him. Giuliani's silence didn't avoid disaster, however. There was no avoiding it. On Friday, a jury ordered him to pay nearly $150 million in damages for defaming former election workers Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman. Shaye is, I guess, nickname Wandrea. How she pronounces it, I don't know. But we know her as Shaye Moss. And Ruby Freeman, of course, after the 2020 election. Earlier last week, to make it read for current audiences, Giuliani's lawyer told the jury that if his client had to pay the $43 million that Moss and Freeman sought, and that's just damages, and then I guess it must have been elevated in terms of punitive damages and et cetera, et cetera. But they were, I guess the suit initially was for $43 million. So even at that level, if Giuliani had to pay that, his lawyer said, it'll be the end of Mr. Giuliani, as though that was going to dissuade the jury. Yes, I know, we're here to end Rudy Giuliani. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But bankruptcy would be a healthy dose of accountability for a powerful man who decided to lie and slander two ordinary people who were doing nothing more than the job they had been hired for in service to the operation of our democracy. This is a very bad moment for Giuliani, but a good moment for America. The case also shows that our legal system, in particular, and how it deals with instances when one person makes knowingly false accusations against another with grave consequences, the system sometimes works exactly as it's supposed to and produces something like justice. We'll see how it shakes out in the end. Giuliani had already lost the case brought by Moss and Freeman. The two were election workers in Atlanta when they found themselves at the center of a conspiracy theory and deranged accusations about election fraud coming from Donald Trump and his allies, particularly Giuliani. In August, a judge found Giuliani civilly liable on plaintiff's defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil conspiracy, and punitive damages claims. he admitted that he made false claims about Moss and Freeman, some of which were particularly lurid. At one point, having seen a video in which the women passed one woman passed the other a ginger mint while working on the sorting and tabulation of ballots, Giuliani claimed that they were, quote, passing around USB ports, which isn't even a thing that you can do, like they were vials of heroin or cocaine as part of the fictional vote-stealing scheme. And I don't have to tell you exactly why. That's just horrific. Not only is it not true, not only can you not pass around USB ports, and didn't know what he thought he was accusing them of passing, but of course he went with the racial trope as well. And, he deserves to go down for this. This part of the trial, though, is meant only to demonstrate how much money Giuliani will have to pay the women. As Moss and Freeman explained in devastating testimony, Trump's and Giuliani's falsehoods turned both women's lives upside down. They were deluged with death threats and racist harassment, which was, of course, the point of all of this, to the point where they legitimately feared for their safety and that of their family. Even Moss's son was overcome by the stress, she testified. This is precisely the kind of case defamation law is set up for. One person knowingly spreading falsehoods about another with serious professional and personal consequences. Given the man on whose behalf Giuliani was acting, it's particularly appropriate that he be punished. And that was one of the uses of the word acting that we love to pull the sound effect down. I was slow on the draw on that one, but we usually use it in a different context. Anyway, one of the cornerstones of defamation law is that public figures have to meet a higher standard in order to sue successfully, since they have more resources at their disposal to counter what people say about them, even if it turns out to be false. Yet the most public figure of all, Donald Trump, was terribly frustrated by the fact that he got so much criticism in the media. So he promised to change the law to allow him to go after his enemies. That is an interesting point. It's beside the point here, of course, because Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman weren't, at the time, public figures. But it is interesting to note that Trump, who kept insisting that he wanted the law changed so that it was easier to go after people for libel and defamation, one ends up on the other end of those suits, and then, of course, cries that this is some sort of miscarriage of justice. They didn't change the law. They met the higher standard. They just sued you. You thought you were going to be doing the suing. But you remember Trump's claims, I'm going to open up our libel laws so that when they purposely write negative and horrible and false articles, we can sue them and win lots of money, he said in 2016. So when the New York Times writes a hit piece, which is a total disgrace, or when the Washington Post, which is there for other reasons, writes a hit piece, we can sue them and win money instead of having no chance of winning because they're totally protected. All right. Well, anyway, that got turned around and stood on its head. And even without the changes, they got clobbered under the more restrictive standard because they were totally out of control in the libel and slanders they were issuing. As a candidate and as president, Trump sued media organizations many times, but inevitably lost. I, Paul Waldman says, was involved in one of those cases. The Trump campaign sued my then employer, the Washington Post, over a critical column I wrote about him. The suit was rightly dismissed by a judge. That and the other Trump suits illustrated the upside-down world of libel law that he promised to create, where the most powerful person in the world goes after those who criticize him. Fortunately, he never opened up our libel laws because that would have required congressional action, and few members of Congress wanted to indulge this particularly petty grievance. But there was nothing petty about what happened to Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman. They were swept up in Trump's attempt to stay in power, even though he lost the election. That attempt was abetted by cronies like Giuliani, who were so hungry for power themselves, they didn't care how many ordinary people they stomped on along the way. If Giuliani spends the remainder of his days eating convenience store ramen and fretting about whether he'll be able to afford a place to live next month, it will be precisely what he deserves. That it will be what he deserves, but it won't be what happens to him. Really, probably no matter what. But he certainly deserves to be in a pinch and to have every dollar that comes his way from now on scrutinized and in some cases seized by the court and turned over to his victims. But like Alex Jones, he's probably hoping that he can just get away with flaunting all of that for the rest of his life, which may not be all that long anyway. He's getting on in years himself and doesn't appear to be particularly healthy or being terribly concerned about maintaining what health he might still have. So we shall see. Okay. No predictions or anything. It's just, it's kind of where he is in life. What can I tell you? All right. Let's see. We'll share a couple other stories with you that we may be able to squeeze in before things close. Oh, we got actually quite more time than I thought. I just happened to see Justice's update for us on what he has planned for his show following the close of ours, and it's come earlier than usual and made me think, we've only got 10 minutes left, but there's a little more. All right. What can we share with you? Gosh, there's a lot. Let's just jump in and read them in reverse order. If we can. And there's probably a better way to rank these things. Well, let me scan just real quick and see what else might we be able to substitute for the last in time, if it makes any sense. I don't know. Gosh, it's difficult to prioritize these things. Okay, let's see. Let me add this one in here. I don't know. This was kind of an odd thing. This is very esoteric, but of course we'll cover it by turning to Empty Wheel for it. We risk the possibility of it becoming totally inscrutable because of the granularity that Marcy gives to these things sometimes. But this does raise a good red flag here, and one that's not being paid attention to anywhere else. One of the great values in following what Marcy has to say, subscribing to her writing if you're so inclined. Although that does remind me, maybe one thing we ought to use our time for here before we launch into it. I promise we'll come back to Empty Wheel, but I have 3 relatively new Patreon subscribers to acknowledge at this point, and I'm a little late in doing so. One, we identify merely, as people turn over their identities to us this way. Norm, everybody, like from Cheers, right? We can all do that. And every time we start a new show, we can say Norm. And in comes Norm with a subscription, a pledge on the 30th of November. So it's getting late on thanking him for this one. Of some note here, I guess Norm, are you Canadian? Because it noted the fact that it was the denomination was in Canadian dollars, which, as we all know, are far more valuable. I think, right? I don't know. It's the other way around. But anyway, one of many Canadian subscribers to whom we extend our thanks. It's no different than extending your thanks to a regular American. I don't know, but it makes a good deal of sense. And we like to know that there are friends in Canada who will, can you hide us in your attic when Trump takes over again here is the real question. But we should be paying you the rent for that in that case. So if you want to reverse the situation, thank you very much. I just enjoyed seeing that there was a different dollar denomination there. It's fun to be reminded of that. Also, when in American dollars, because there may be American or they converted their currency, they may be living in Tanzania for all I know. John Rodia, a new subscriber on the 1st of the month. Jumping right in, and just a couple of days ago, middle of or beginning of last week on the 12th, a boost in an already existing pledge from friend Bruce McFarlane. So thank you to all. We should one day go over all of the people I should find the old Thanksgiving show because it took a long time to get through all of that. And I don't know if I could compile that list again, but thanks to all who join and help support the show and help give us justification for doing this every weekday morning when we could be out greeting folks at Walmart instead. So, but we'd be talking to a very different crowd. All right, back to the Empty Wheel piece as promised. This something I just really haven't seen discussed anywhere else. It probably was discussed somewhere because, as you know, she very reliant, like we are, on facts as reported by the media, even if she has critical things to say about the way those facts are reported. Google, that big corporation you've probably heard of. Google kills everybody. That's terrible, I know, but as predicted by the Terminator. No, in this case, Google kills the geofence capability that will show, I think it'll be around for long enough to do this, that there were about 30,000 Trump supporters swarming in the Capitol on Trump's orders on January 6th. But you may recall from the way the case was initially pursued, both in official channels and unofficial, that people's cell phones pinging off the towers nearby was information data that could be used to prove that you were illegally inside the Capitol on that day, or at least very near to it and on the grounds. And they were able to discern for a large number of people with a lot of, with considerable precision, not only whether they were inside or outside, but what rooms they were in even. Okay, very valuable. As it turns out, Google says, I don't know, are they pulling the plug on the whole thing entirely? Is it a privacy concern? Is it real? Are they not pulling the plug? They're just going to pull the plug on making that data available? I don't know. But it shouldn't happen before you're able to prove the presence of the January 6th rioters inside the building in most of their cases. But I don't know, something we ought to be aware of. At Trump's trial, prosecutors will use Google location data to show how Trump's mobs responded to his order to march to the Capitol by doing just that, i.e., of course, him setting on foot an insurrection against the United States. I have yet to see those charges lodged, but anyway, but that's exactly what happened. He ordered them to march to the Capitol, and then their phones will show that they did just that. That data will show that roughly a quarter of the people at the ellipse, around 30,000 people, entered the restricted grounds outside the Capitol, committing at least trespassing on Trump's instructions, of which 11,500 would be identified by their Google location data. Jack Smith's prosecutors revealed that they will do this on Monday, that's today, in an expert notice filing. So they're going to bring in some expert witnesses to testify to this. That's their intention. On Wednesday, last Wednesday, Google announced that it will soon change the way Google location works to make such analysis impossible in the future. I'm not certain whether this is a good thing from a privacy perspective. Bad, certainly would be a bad thing in terms of prosecuting these guys, except that I think that the work is done there. They just need to present the findings, so it may be okay. It's just weird. And we'll find out what Marcy thinks about it. And here's a quote then from Google's own blog discussing the change. If you're among the subset of users who have chosen to turn location history on, it's off by default, they claim, by the way, soon your timeline will be saved right on your device, giving you even more control over your data. Just like before, you can delete all or part of your information at any time or disable the setting entirely. It's probably good news from a privacy perspective, although I rarely believe, anything that says that Google isn't also keeping themselves a copy of data that they're producing, I have doubts about. But separate issue. If you're getting a new phone or are worried about losing your existing one, you can always choose to back up your data to the cloud so it doesn't get lost. Will automatically encrypt your backed up data so no one can read it, including Google, so they claim. Additionally, when you first turn on location history, the auto delete control will be set to 3 months by default, which means that any data older than that will be automatically deleted. Previously, this option was set to 18 months. If you wanted to save memories to your timeline for a longer period, don't worry, you can always choose to extend the period or turn off auto-delete controls altogether. These changes will gradually roll out through the next year on Android and iOS, and you'll receive a notification when this update comes to your account. All right, so that's it for the grab from their blog. Now back to Marcy. Oren Kerr, first identified the significance of the change to surveillance capabilities, that it will make Google's geofence warrants all but impossible. Forbes confirmed that Google is making the change with the intent of making it impossible to respond to geofence warrants. But they missed one aspect of the timing. The announcement of a change Google is implementing prospectively, a change that will take a year to implement. It came days after prosecutors revealed that they had obtained a Google warrant showing the movement of people from the ellipse to the Capitol. And here, I guess, in Smith's filing of notice for bringing an expert to testify at trial, describing one of those experts, Expert 1 is the only identity here. Expert 1 has knowledge, skill, experience, training, and education beyond the ordinary layperson. That's the triggering mumbo-jumbo, essentially, the magic words for finding somebody or allowing somebody as an expert witness. Well, this person has training, etc., beyond the ordinary layperson regarding the interpretation and visual representation of geographic location data. The government expects that Expert 1 will testify about his or her use of ArcGIS, or Graphic Information Systems, ArcGIS software to create a map of the Google location history data produced in response to a search warrant. That's the key part. Specifically, Expert 1 plotted the location history data for Google accounts and devices associated with individuals who moved on January 6th from an area at or near the ellipse to an area encompassing the United States Capitol building. His or her testimony will describe and explain the resulting graphical representations of that data, and it will aid the jury in understanding the movements of individuals toward the Capitol area during and after the defendant's speech at the ellipse. We had known that the FBI and Google geofence warrants, Marcy says, which identify all the people using Google location services in a given geographic area to identify individual January 6th suspects. Challenges to the geofence, first by trespasser David Ryan and then by cop sprayer Israel Easterday, revealed that the FBI had gotten 2 geofence warrants and had done 3 sets of de-anonymization of the data obtained. The first on January 13th, 2021, just for the Capitol building itself, and then the second for the entire restricted area outside the Capitol on May 21st, 2021. So, the second one was a little longer in coming, but the first one was right then, at least during January of 2021. So, for people who, continually insist that nothing was done until a year later or whatever. Okay, that's not so, but the work might have gone slow once they got it. The warrant described in Tuesday's expert notice must be a third warrant, though, one building off of the May 2021 warrant. Perhaps the FBI asked Google for all these selectors found in the May 2021 warrant, who, with the important exception of journalists, were either victims, first responders, or trespassers that also showed up in a geofence at the ellipse while Trump was speaking. So they were refining their data request, is the guess. There would be no need to de-anonymize these selectors. Those of investigative interest for their own actions at the Capitol would have been de-anonymized with one of the earlier warrants. This warrant, this third one that's alleged here, is about capturing the effect of Trump's speech, measuring how many people who attended the speech itself, Trump claims 120,000 did so, and then moved to the Capitol. Of those who moved, only a third or less would trigger the geofence, and fewer among Apple users. But it would include most of the 11,500 people who had already been identified and de-anonymized. Altogether, that's consistent with 30,000 people being at the Capitol. Trump is claiming that just 1% of those who heard his incitement went to join the insurrection. But, of course, we learned from Dick Cheney that 1% is enough, right? Well, different context and a different 1%. But anyway, this expert witness, though, will show that it's closer to a quarter of the total of those at the ellipse. There were a range of reasons why Google made the decision to end its ability to respond to geofence requests. As Forbes noted, the Fourth Circuit also heard the government's appeal of Okello Chatri's successful challenge to a geofence this week. Early next year, the D.C. Circuit will review Ryan's repeal of its use with him. The Easterday challenge made it clear that Google geofences work best on Android devices, meaning Google was making it easier for law enforcement to investigate its customers over Apple's. So that might be what ends up driving the change. But Google announced this decision of prospective changes months ahead of the time when a geofence will be used to prove the crimes of Donald Trump. It's likely, at least partly, an attempt to preempt the blowback that is bound to result. And in an update, to clarify some responses I'm getting to this, killing the geofence capability won't affect the evidence against Trump at all. Prosecutors already got the warrant and did the analysis on the results. This will only prospectively make Google geofence warrants impossible, not even immediately. But it's interesting and worth noting, and of course when Marcy notes it, we want to note it too, because you never know when that's going to come up, and it's always good to have these things on background when weird stuff happens later. Understanding that kind of minutia or having an awareness of it in the background will help immeasurably, I think. And of course, if we follow Marcy along the way, we'll be less confused later when the conclusions are reached. All right, speaking of reaching conclusions, we've reached the conclusion of today's show. But that means it's just time for Justice Putnam to get started with his West Coast cookbook and speakeasy, following us here right on Netroots Radio. Don't even change your dial if you want to catch up on the following. Trump is becoming, of course, more explicit on how he wants to take down U.S. democracy. And then later on the menu, fake news sites have ballooned 1,000% since May, and what an atmosphere to be working in. And artificial intelligence is only making it worse. How about another tidbit or two after this brief announcement to entice you to stick around?
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Oh dear, a health alert. Health officials have opened a tuberculosis probe involving dozens of schools in Nevada's most populous county. That's never good news. How about internationally? Albania returned 20 religious and secular icons to neighboring North Macedonia that were stolen just a decade ago. Usually that stuff goes back a long ways. Good news. Stay tuned.